The envelope was heavy. Not heavy like a gold bar or a guilt-ridden conscience, but heavy with that specific high-bond paperweight reserved for people who want to ruin your Tuesday. It was certified mail. The return address simply read, the Oak Creek Homeowners Association. I stood in my driveway, the engine of my Ford F-150 ticking as it cooled down, and tore the flap open. I didn't even make it to the front door. Notice of violation. Unauthorized exterior modification. I looked up from the paper. I looked at my fence. It was a beautiful fence. It was 6 feet of pristine vertical cedar planks that I had spent the last weekend sweating over. I had sanded it. I had primed it. And finally, I had painted it a warm, inviting shade known at the hardware store as Tuscan Sunset. It was an earthy, reddish-brown. It looked like the kind of wood you'd find on a vineyard in Italy, or perhaps on the deck of a very expensive yacht owned by a guy named Stefano. I looked back at the letter. Violation. Non-compliant pigment. Current status. Tuscan Sunset. Required status. Dune Beige, SW 7504. Remedy. Repaint or remove within 14 days. Dune Beige, I said aloud. The words tasted like dry wall dust. It's the undertones, Dave. I jumped, nearly dropping the letter into my azaleas. I turned around to see Gerald standing on the sidewalk. Gerald is the president of the HOA. He is a man who wears polo shirts tucked into cargo shorts with a belt that is pulled so tight I worry about his internal organs. He was walking his standard poodle, Winston, who looked just as judgmental as his owner. Gerald, I said, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. I didn't hear you approach. You move like a ninja in boat shoes. Gerald didn't smile. He never smiled. He treated the neighborhood covenants like the Geneva Convention. He reached into his back pocket, not for a wallet, not for a phone, but for a thick, fan-shaped object. A Pantone color swatch book. He wielded it like a switchblade. He stepped onto my driveway, uninvited, and marched up to the fence. He fanned out the book, flipping through hundreds of shades of tan, taupe, and sadness until he landed on a specific strip. He held it up against my beautiful Tuscan Sunset. You see? Gerald said, tapping the paper strip against my wood. This is Dune Beige. Notice the calming neutrality. Notice the lack of aggression. Aggression? I crossed my arms. It's a fence, Gerald. It's not threatening to punch you. It's just sitting there. Tuscan Sunset is an emotional color, Gerald said, his voice dropping to a lecture whisper. It excites the eye. It raises the blood pressure. We aim for equity here, Dave. Uniformity. If we let you keep this, Bob down the street will want to paint his shutters Caribbean mist, and then where are we? We're in a carnival, that's where. Bob's shutters are falling off, I pointed out. Maybe we should focus on that. Bob has filed the appropriate paperwork for shutter restoration, Gerald sniffed. You, however, went rogue. You went to Home Depot. You bought a bucket of anarchy, and you smeared it on property that affects our collective home values. It looks like wood, Gerald. It's a reddish-brown. Trees are reddish-brown. Gerald sighed, the long, suffering sigh of a man carrying the weight of the entire cul-de-sac on his shoulders. Cedar is brown. Redwood is red. This, he gestured vaguely at my hard work, is a pizza sauce tragedy. You have 14 days, Dave, or the fines start. $50 a day. He tugged on Winston's leash. Come, Winston. Let's go inspect the Johnsons' recycling bins. I have a suspicion they're using the wrong blue bags. I watched him walk away, the swatch book holstered in his pocket. I looked back at my fence. It glowed in the afternoon sun. It looked warm. It looked like home. Dune beige, I muttered, over my dead body. 3 days later, my body wasn't dead, but my spirit was in critical condition. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by 3 empty coffee mugs and a laptop that was running hot enough to fry an egg. I had called 3 contractors. The quotes for stripping the paint and repainting it dune beige were sitting in front of me. Quote 1, $1,200. Quote 2, $1,450. Quote 3, I don't touch HOA disputes, man. Good luck. I couldn't afford to pay $1,500 to make my house look uglier. It was a matter of principle. It was a matter of solvency. I stared at the cease and desist letter again. The sheer bureaucratic weight of it made my eye twitch. There has to be a way out, I whispered. I opened the file on my laptop that every homeowner dreads. The covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CCNRs, of Oak Creek Estates. We called it the Blue Book of Doom. It was 200 pages of legalese designed to ensure that no one ever had too much fun. I started reading. Page 14, grass height requirements. Page 32, prohibition of non-native flagpoles. Page 58, acceptable fonts for mailbox numbers. My eyes glazed over. I poured a 4th cup of coffee. It was 11 p.m. I was looking for a loophole, a typo, a contradiction, anything. I felt like a lawyer defending a client on death row, except the client was a fence and the electric chair was a bucket of beige paint. And then, around midnight, I found it. I blinked. I rubbed my eyes and zoomed in on the PDF. Article 14, Section B, Exterior Decorations and Art Installations. Homeowners are prohibited from painting exterior structures colors not found in the approved palette, Appendix A. However, strictly decorative, freestanding art installations, sculptures, and murals located on private property are exempt from color palette restrictions, provided they do not depict obscenity, violence, or political endorsements, and are classified under the Community Culture Clause to promote neighborhood artistic expression. I read it. Again. Murals are exempt. I sat back in my chair. A slow, maniacal grin spread across my face. I wasn't allowed to have a red fence. That was a structure. But I was allowed to have a mural. I grabbed my phone. I knew it was late, but I knew exactly who would be awake. Brenda. Brenda was the HOA secretary. She was a sweet, chaotic woman who baked brownies for everyone and secretly despised Gerald because he once measured the distance between her garden gnomes with a ruler and told her they were congregating illegally. She picked up on the second ring. Dave, is everything okay? Is your house on fire? Brenda, I said, my voice trembling with caffeine and adrenaline. I need you to clarify something for me, hypothetically. Okay, she sounded wary. If I were to commission a painting, a piece of art, on my property, does Gerald have the authority to regulate the colors used in said art? Oh, Lord, Brenda sighed. Is this about the fence? It is and it isn't. I'm looking at Article 14, Section B, the Community Culture Clause. Who determines what constitutes a mural? Well, Brenda said, and I could hear her lighting a cigarette on the other end. Technically, the board can't define art. We tried that in '09 when the Petersons put up that abstract metal thing that looked like a reproductive organ. Our lawyer said if we tried to define art, we'd get sued for First Amendment violations. So as long as it's not pornographic, it's a mural. So, I said, leaning in close to the phone, if I hired an artist to paint a picture on my fence, the fence becomes a canvas. It's no longer a structure subject to the color palette. It's a cultural installation. There was a long silence on the line. Then I heard a small, sharp giggle. "Dave," she whispered, "what are you going to do?" "I'm going to comply, Brenda. I'm going to give Gerald exactly what he wants. He wants a fence that fits the aesthetic of the neighborhood. He's going to get the most realistic fence this town has ever seen." "I don't understand," she said. "I'm not going to paint the fence a color," I said, standing up and looking out the window at the dark outline of my yard. "I'm going to paint a mural of a fence. On my fence." "That sounds expensive," she said. "Oh, it will be," I replied. "But cheaper than my dignity." "Just be careful," Brenda warned. "Gerald just bought a drone. He's watching." "Let him watch," I said. "He's about to witness a masterpiece." I hung up the phone. I felt a surge of energy that had nothing to do with the coffee. I didn't need a house painter. I needed an artist. I needed someone who understood perspective, shading, and malicious compliance. I opened my laptop again and navigated to Craigslist, then to a local art college forum. I began typing. Wanted, hyperrealist muralist. Project, large-scale outdoor installation. Subject, wood, rotting, decrepit, authentic wood. Pay, competitive. Requirement, must hate authority and be able to paint a rusty nail so real it makes people want to get a tetanus shot. I hit enter. The trap was set. Now I just needed to find the Michelangelo of petty revenge. I spent the next morning sitting on a cooler in my driveway, conducting interviews for the most ridiculous job opening in the history of the tri-state area. The ad had attracted exactly the kind of people you'd expect to find on the gigs section of Craigslist at 2:00 a.m. The first guy, Rick, pulled up in a van that smelled like turpentine and wet dog. He was wearing a shirt that said, "Painters do it with even strokes." "So, you want a mural," Rick said, looking at the fence. He squinted. "Like a tropical beach? I do a killer dolphin. I can make the blowhole look like it's following you." "No dolphins, Rick," I said. "I want you to paint a fence." Rick blinked. He looked at the wooden fence, then he looked at me. Then he looked back at the fence. "It is a fence," he said slowly. "Yes, but I want it to be a painting of a fence, a mural that depicts a fence." Rick scratched his neck. "So, brown?" "Not just brown. I want wood grain. I want shadows. I want the illusion of depth. I want people to walk past this and question the nature of reality." Rick stared at me for a long time. "I charge extra for reality," he said. "And I gotta be honest, buddy, you look like you need a nap." I sent Rick away. The second candidate was a woman named Sheila, who specialized in pet psychics and portraits. She offered to paint my late grandmother's spirit animal on the center slat. I didn't have the heart to tell her my grandmother's spirit animal was likely a gin martini, so I passed. Then, around noon, a 1998 Volvo station wagon sputtered up the street. It was missing a hubcap and had a bumper sticker that read, "God is dead, but art is alive." A young man unfolded himself from the driver's seat. He was impossibly tall and thin, wearing skinny jeans that defied the laws of circulation and a scarf, despite it being 75 degrees. He was vaping something that smelled like fruity pebbles and despair. "I'm Laszlo," he said. He didn't shake my hand. He just vibrated slightly in my direction. "I'm here for the commission." "Great," I said. "Did you read the brief?" Laszlo walked past me, ignoring my existence, and approached the fence. He ran a long, pale finger along the Tuscan sunset planks. He shuddered. "This pigment," he whispered. "Its derivative. It screams silence. It screams violation according to my HOA," I said. Laszlo turned to me. His eyes were wide and intense, like a lemur seeing a ghost. "You want to subvert the paradigm of the suburban barrier. You want to take the concept of exclusion, which is what a fence is, and turn it into inclusion through the medium of trompe-l'oeil." I blinked. "I mostly just want to tick off a guy named Gerald. But sure, let's go with the paradigm thing. I'm a student of the neo-realist decay movement," Laszlo declared, blowing a cloud of strawberry vapor into my azaleas. "I don't paint objects, Dave. I paint the entropy of objects. I can paint this fence not as it is, but as it fears to be." "Can you make it look like rotting wood?" Laszlo scoffed. "I can make it look so rotting, you'll try to pull a splinter out of the paint." "You're hired," I said. "When can you start?" "I must commune with the wood first," Laszlo said. "I need complete silence, and a tarp, a very large tarp. The artist cannot work under the gaze of the bourgeoisie." "The bourgeoisie is walking his poodle in about 20 minutes. I checked my watch. "So we better get that tarp up fast." By 4 p.m., my house looked like a crime scene. Laszlo and I had draped 3 massive blue polyethylene tarps over the entire 60-foot span of the fence. We secured them with bungee cords and duct tape. From the street, it looked like I was hiding a crashed UFO or a pile of bodies. I was standing in the yard, holding a ladder for Laszlo, who was meticulously priming the surface white, when I heard the inevitable sound of boat shoes scuffing on pavement. "Dave!" I closed my eyes. "Hello, Gerald?" "Dave, what in the name of the bylaws is this?" Gerald's voice was an octave higher than usual. I poked my head out from behind the blue plastic curtain. Gerald was standing on the sidewalk, his face an alarming shade of purple that clashed with his polo. Winston the poodle was barking at the tarp. "It's a construction barrier, Gerald," I said smoothly. "For safety." "Safety?" Gerald sputtered. "It's an eyesore. Article 9, Section C prohibits unsightly temporary structures for more than 48 hours without a permit." "It's not a structure," I corrected him. "It's a dust containment system. I'm having the fence remediated. You wanted the Tuscan sunset gone, right? Well, the artist I hired needs to ensure that no unauthorized pigment particles drift into the community air. I'm doing this for you, Gerald. I'm protecting your lung capacity." Gerald narrowed his eyes. He tried to peer through a gap in the tarp where 2 sheets overlapped. "Artist?" he asked suspiciously. "You said you were hiring a painter." "A specialized painter," I said. "Very high-end. He doesn't want to be disturbed. He's in the zone." From behind the tarp, Laszlo's voice drifted out. He was muttering to himself. "Yes, the knot must bleed. The grain must weep." Gerald took a step back. Is he crying?" "He's emotional about primer," I said. "Look, Gerald, the letter gave me 14 days. I'm on day 5. The fence will be compliant by the deadline. Until then, the tarp stays. OSHA regulations." I threw out the OSHA acronym because I knew Gerald was terrified of federal agencies. It worked. He stiffened. "Fine," Gerald snapped. "But if that tarp flaps loudly in the wind after 10 p.m., I'm filing a noise complaint. Come, Winston." He marched away, writing something furiously in a small notebook. The next 3 days were a blur of madness. Laszlo was not a contractor. He was a possession. He arrived every morning at 6 a.m., fueled by espresso and artistic rage. He set up a palette that looked like a muddy war zone. burnt umber, raw sienna, lamp black, titanium white, and a color he called existential gray. He worked with brushes the size of eyelashes. I sat in a lawn chair behind the tarp, watching him work. It was mesmerizing. "You see this?" Laszlo pointed to a flat, smooth plank of cedar. "The wood is smooth, but the eye expects texture." He dipped a tiny brush into a mix of black and gray. With a flick of his wrist, he painted a crack. It wasn't just a black line. He painted the shadow inside the crack. He painted the highlighted edge where the light would hit the split wood. He stepped back. My brain short-circuited. I reached out to touch it. My finger expected to dip into a groove, but it hit smooth, flat paint. "Whoa," I said. "Don't touch the illusion, Dave," Laszlo snapped. "You'll smudge the decay." "Laszlo, it looks like garbage." "Thank you," he said, bowing. He moved down the line. He painted water stains. He painted green moss growing near the bottom of the slats. He painted a rusted nail head that looked so sharp I wanted to get a hammer to pull it out. On day 3, the neighborhood curiosity reached a boiling point. Mrs. Higgins, the elderly woman next door who spent her days spying on the mailman, was caught trying to lift the bottom of the tarp with a garden hoe. "I just want to see the color," she shouted when I caught her. Is it beige? It smells like chemicals." "It's a surprise, Mrs. Higgins," I shouted back, gently pushing her hoe away. "It's a memorial shrine, very sacred. Bad luck to look before it's done." "A shrine?" she gasped. "For who?" "For liberty," I said. By the afternoon of the final day, Laszlo was exhausted. He was covered in paint. He had paint in his hair, on his vape pen, and I'm pretty sure on his teeth. He stood back to admire his work. We were still under the blue tarp, in the dim, blue-tinted light. The fence ran for 60 feet. It was a masterpiece of ruin. To the naked eye, it looked like a fence that had been neglected since the Great Depression. It was graying, weather-beaten, and sad. There were knots where the wood had supposedly fallen out. There were termite trails. "It's hideous," I said, a tear coming to my eye. "It's the ugliest thing I've ever seen." "It is the truth," Laszlo whispered. "The suburbs try to hide the decay. I have brought the decay to the surface." "Wait," I said, leaning in closer to the third panel from the left. "What is that?" Laszlo smiled, a rare, terrifying expression. "The pièce de résistance." I squinted. There, painted at eye level, was a raccoon, but not a cute, cartoon raccoon. It was a photorealistic, scruffy, possibly rabid raccoon that appeared to be peeking through a hole in the fence. Its eyes were painted with a reflective gloss so that they caught the light. It looked like it was staring into your soul and judging your credit score. "Laszlo," I said, "that raccoon is going to give someone a heart attack." "His name is Barnaby," Laszlo said. "He represents the wild chaos encroaching on the manicured lawn." "Does he represent an HOA violation?" "He is art," Laszlo said, packing up his brushes. "Art cannot violate. Art only reveals." I handed Laszlo a check. It was for significantly more than the Dune beige painters would have cost. I didn't care. "Tomorrow," I said, looking at the tarp, "we unveil." "Tomorrow," Laszlo agreed, lighting his vape. "We break the system." I went inside and poured myself a drink. I watched the sun set through the window, knowing that tomorrow the sun would rise on the decay of the American dream, and Gerald's head was absolutely going to explode. The morning of the reveal felt less like a home improvement project and more like the dawn of a revolution. Or perhaps a public execution. It really depended on which side of the property line you were standing. I stood on my porch at 8:00 a.m., clutching a mug of coffee that was more espresso than water. The street was suspiciously active for a Wednesday morning. Mrs. Higgins was weeding her petunias, which mostly involved her staring fixedly at my driveway while holding a trowel upside down. The guy from 3 doors down, Bob, of the falling shutters, was washing his car for the 3rd time that week. Even the mailman seemed to be walking slower than usual. Everyone knew the deadline was today. The Great Beige Mandate had expired at midnight. At 8:05 a.m., the inevitable happened. Gerald emerged. He didn't walk. He patrolled. He wore a fresh polo, lemon yellow this time, an aggressive choice, and his clipboard was held against his chest like a shield. Winston the poodle trotted beside him, looking equally officious. I walked down the driveway to meet him. I was wearing my lucky flannel shirt. "Good morning, Gerald," I called out. Gerald stopped at the edge of my lawn. He tapped his pen against his clipboard. "Morning, Dave. I see the tarp is still up." "Just about to take it down," I said. "The treatment needed to cure overnight." "Treatment?" Gerald raised an eyebrow. "I trust you've applied 2 coats of Sherwin-Williams S7504 Dune Beige, or perhaps you went with the approved alternative, Sandcastle Tears." "I think you'll find the results speak for themselves," I said. I signaled to Laszlo. The artist was slumped in a lawn chair in my garage, wearing sunglasses indoors and eating a croissant with a pair of chopsticks. He nodded solemnly, stood up, and walked to the far end of the fence. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the empty air, though Mrs. Higgins leaned so far forward she nearly fell into her azaleas. "And Gerald, I present to you the compliant solution to our dispute." I grabbed the corner of the blue tarp. Laszlo grabbed the other. 1, 2, 3! We yanked. The bungee cords snapped free. The heavy blue plastic billowed, caught the wind, and slid to the ground in a rustling heap. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the kind of silence usually reserved for bomb defusals or the reading of a particularly shocking will. The fence was revealed. It was magnificent. It was horrifying. From a distance of 10 feet, it looked like a structure that should be condemned by the health department. Laszlo had outdone himself. The wood appeared to be gray, splintered, and warped by decades of neglect. There were holes where knots had supposedly fallen out, revealing darkness behind them. There were streaks of green algae running down the slats. At the bottom, weeds, painted with exquisite detail, appeared to be choking the base of the boards. And of course, there was Barnaby. The photorealistic raccoon painted on the 3rd panel looked so alive, so three-dimensional, that he seemed to be physically leaning out of a jagged hole in the wood, clutching a piece of trash. Mrs. Higgins let out a small shriek. "Oh my heavens, it's infested!" Gerald stood frozen. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. He looked like a fish that had been slapped with a wet towel. "My God," Gerald whispered. "What have you done?" "I fixed it," I said, beaming. Gerald marched forward, his face turning from lemon yellow adjacent to a deep, vascular red. "Fixed it? Dave, you've destroyed it! You stripped the paint! You let it rot! Look at that! There's mold! There's vermin!" He pointed a shaking finger at Barnaby. "That is a raccoon, Gerald. A vector for rabies. You are harboring wildlife in a residential barrier." "It's not real, Gerald," I said calmly. "Not real? "Are you blind?" Gerald shouted. He was now 3 feet away from the fence. "Look at the splinters. It's a safety hazard. If a child touches this, they'll need a tetanus shot. This is a blight. This is property value suicide." "Gerald," I said, "I assure you it's perfectly smooth." "Don't lie to me. I can see the texture. I can see the rust on the nails." He lunged forward. He was going to prove me wrong. He reached out his hand to grab a jagged, rotting piece of wood near the top rail. I waited for it. The moment of contact. Gerald's hand clamped down on the fence. Squeak! The sound was unmistakable. It was the sound of sweaty skin sliding against high-gloss, marine-grade polyurethane varnish. Gerald froze. He looked at his hand. He looked at the wood. He rubbed his thumb against a rusty nail. It was as smooth as glass. He stepped back, blinking rapidly. He looked like he was having a vertigo attack. It's slimy," he whispered. "It's varnish," I corrected. "To protect the art." "Art," Gerald choked out the word. "This isn't art. This is a hallucination. It looks like a shanty town." "It's a mural, Gerald," I said, pulling a folded piece of paper from my back pocket. According to Article 14, Section B of the bylaws, murals are exempt from the color palette restrictions. This is a hyper-realistic depiction of a fence in a state of natural entropy. It's titled Suburban Decay, a commentary on the futility of order. Laszlo drifted out of the garage, looking bored. "The raccoon represents the chaotic id," he added helpfully. Gerald looked at Laszlo, then at me, then at the fence. The cognitive dissonance was physically painful for him. He wanted to hate the color, but there was no color. There was only a painting of a lack of color. "You can't do this," Gerald hissed. "You can't paint a fence to look like a worse fence." "Show me the rule," I challenged. "Show me the rule that says I can't paint a picture of wood on wood." Gerald vibrated. He actually vibrated. "This is mockery. This is insubordination. That raccoon is mocking me." "Barnaby judges all of us," Laszlo said. "I'm calling the police," Gerald screamed. "This is a public nuisance. It's distracting drivers. It's psychological warfare." He fumbled for his phone, dropping his stylus in the grass. "Go ahead, Gerald," I said, crossing my arms. "Call the cops. I'll make coffee." Officer Miller arrived 20 minutes later. I knew Officer Miller. He was a good man who had spent 20 years on the force dealing with actual crimes, which meant he had zero patience for the 911 calls originating from Oak Creek Estates. He climbed out of his cruiser, adjusted his belt, and looked at the scene. He saw Gerald, red-faced and panting. He saw me, drinking coffee. He saw Laszlo, who was now sketching the police car, and he saw the fence. He walked up the driveway, taking off his sunglasses. "Morning, Dave," Miller said. "Gerald?" "Officer," Gerald shouted, pointing at my property. "Arrest this man, or at least issue a citation for Section 504, disturbance of the peace and visual assault." Miller looked at the fence. He squinted. "Looks like you got some termite damage there, Dave. Might want to call an exterminator." "Touch it, Miller," I said. Miller frowned. He walked over and poked the termite damage. His finger slid off. "Huh," Miller said. "Paint?" "Mural," I said. "Vandalism," Gerald corrected. "He has vandalized his own property to lower the tone of the neighborhood. Look at that raccoon. It's aggressive. It's startling. It caused Mrs. Higgins to have palpitations." Miller looked at Barnaby, the raccoon. Barnaby stared back, his painted eyes gleaming with mischief. "It's a very detailed raccoon," Miller admitted. "It's a menace," Gerald insisted. "I want it painted over. I want it beige, Dune beige, right now. Miller sighed. He took out his notepad, mostly to give his hands something to do. Gerald, is the fence on his property? Yes, but is it? Depicting anything obscene? Nudity? Gang signs? Profanity? It's depicting rot, Gerald shrieked. It's depicting poverty. We are a luxury community. It's art, I interjected. Protected speech. It's a picture of a fence, Miller said, rubbing his temple. Dave, why did you paint a picture of a fence on your fence? Because Gerald didn't like the color of the real fence, I explained reasonably. So I hired an artist to create a cultural statement. It's a loophole, Gerald shouted. He's exploiting a loophole. Miller looked at me. Is that true, Dave? Are you being a smartass? I am complying with the written bylaws, officer. Article 14, Section B. Miller looked back at the fence. He was trying hard not to smile, but the corner of his mustache twitched. Well, Gerald, unless you can show me a law that says a man can't paint a raccoon on his property, this is a civil matter. I can't issue a citation for ugly fence. It's not ugly, Laszlo shouted from the garage. It is raw. It's a distraction. Gerald pivoted his argument. It's dangerous. Drivers will look at it, think they're about to crash into a pile of lumber and swerve. It's a traffic hazard. As if on cue, nature decided to intervene. A blue jay, fat and happy, swooped down from the oak tree across the street. It was looking for a place to perch. It saw the top rail of my fence, which was painted with a stunningly realistic 3D shadow to look like a flat, weathered surface. The bird flared its wings and extended its landing gear. It aimed for the wood. But there was no wood. There was only a vertical, slick, varnished board painted to look like a horizontal top rail. Thwack! The blue jay hit the vertical surface, its claws scrabbling uselessly against the slippery paint. It let out a confused squawk, slid down the face of the fence about 6 inches, realized gravity was not working as advertised, and frantically flapped away in a panic, leaving a small white smudge on the rot. There was a moment of silence. Officer Miller let out a short, sharp snort of laughter. He covered it with a cough and... Okay, Miller said, his voice shaking slightly. That was funny. See? Gerald shouted, waving his arms. The wildlife is confused. You're disrupting the ecosystem. I think the bird will live, Gerald, Miller said, putting his sunglasses back on. Look, I'm not writing this up. Dave, maybe put a sign up so people don't lean on it and fall over? But legally, you're in the clear. This isn't over, Gerald seethed. He turned to me, his eyes narrowing. You think you're clever, Dave? You think you've won? I'm calling an emergency board meeting, tonight. We will amend the bylaws. We will define mural, and we will ban this abomination. You can try, I said, but the bylaws require a 30-day notice for amendments, and I've already registered the mural with the County Arts Council for the upcoming Suburban Walk contest. It has historical protection status pending the judging. I had absolutely not done that, but Gerald didn't know that. Gerald's face went blank. What? It's a contender for Best Mixed Media, Laszlo called out. Gerald let out a noise that sounded like a tea kettle boiling over. He spun around, yanked Winston's leash, and stormed off down the street. You'll hear from our lawyers. You'll hear from everyone. Officer Miller watched him go. He turned back to the fence. He walked up to Barnaby the raccoon and touched the painted nose. Damn, Miller said. That's some good paint. Thanks, Miller. You're gonna start a war, you know that? The war started when he insulted my Tuscan sunset, I said. Miller chuckled and walked back to his car. Keep it weird, Dave. Keep it weird. I stood there for a moment, admiring the view. The sun was fully up now, illuminating the fake water stains and the painted cracks. It was hideous. It was perfect. Laszlo walked up beside me. "The bird was a paid actor," Laszlo said. "Really?" "No, but it added to the performance piece, the rejection of nature by the artificial simulation of nature. It's meta." "It was hilarious," I said. But as I watched Gerald disappear into his own pristine beige house down the street, I knew this wasn't the end. Gerald was a man of rules, and when the rules failed him, he would make new ones. I looked at Barnaby. Barnaby looked at me. "We need to go bigger," I said to the raccoon. Laszlo lit his vape. "I have ideas for the garage door. I'm thinking open cavern with sleeping bear." "Let's see how the town hall goes first," I said, "but keep the bear in mind." I didn't know it then, but the Dune beige disaster was just the opening shot. The real battle was about to happen in the community center, under the fluorescent lights, where the fate of the raccoon fence and the soul of the neighborhood would be decided. The Oak Creek Community Center was a soulless brick building that smelled permanently of floor wax and disappointed Cub Scouts. By 7:00 p.m., the main hall was packed. In the suburbs, there is no entertainment greater than a public feud. Netflix cannot compete with the spectacle of two grown men arguing over fence pigments. The room was filled with folding chairs, and every single one was occupied. I sat in the front row. To my right sat Laszlo. He was wearing a velvet cape. I didn't ask where he got it. I just accepted that this was his courtroom attire. At the front of the room, standing behind a podium that was slightly too tall for him, was Gerald. He looked exhausted. His polo was wrinkled. He banged a wooden gavel that I was 90% sure he brought from home. "Order!" Gerald shouted, though the room was already silent. "I call this emergency meeting of the Oak Creek HOA to order. The topic, the crisis on Elm Street." "It's a mural!" someone shouted from the back. "It is a visual assault," Gerald corrected, slamming the gavel down. "We are here to discuss the immediate amendment of Article 14 to ban trompe-l'oeil, optical illusions, and hyper-realistic depictions of garbage from our community." Gerald dimmed the lights and clicked a remote. A projector screen descended. Slide 1. The offense. A grainy photo of my fence appeared on the screen. In the low light, the painted rot looked even more convincing. The raccoon, Barnaby, seemed to be glowing with demonic energy. "This," Gerald said, pointing a laser pointer at the raccoon's nose, "is what Mr. Davison calls art. I call it a breach of the social contract. Property values are based on perception. If a potential buyer drives past and sees a fence that appears to be held together by moss and prayer, they do not buy. They flee." "But it's not real rot, Gerald," Bob called out. Bob was the guy with the falling shutters. "It's actually really high-quality paint. I scratched it. It's durable." "That is not the point, Bob," Gerald snapped. "The point is the suggestion of squalor. It invites chaos. Today, it's a fake rotting fence. Tomorrow, someone paints a fake burning car in their driveway. Where does it end?" "Slippery slope fallacy," Laszlo whispered loudly. Gerald turned his laser pointer on Laszlo. "And you, the accomplice." Laszlo stood up. The velvet cape swished dramatically. He turned to face the audience, ignoring Gerald entirely. "Neighbors," Laszlo began, his voice smooth and projecting to the back of the room. "The prosecution speaks of values. But what of value? Is there value in a beige box? Is there soul in Dune beige?" "I like Dune beige," Mrs. Higgins piped up from the second row. "Of course you do, madam," Laszlo said gently. It is the color of safety. But Mr. Davison's fence, it challenges us. It asks us to confront the inevitable decay of our own lives. That raccoon? That raccoon is us, scavenging for meaning in a manicured world. The room went quiet. People were actually thinking about it. Also, Laszlo added, it's worth noting that since the mural went up, speeding on Elm Street has decreased by 40%. Because people are staring at the train wreck, Gerald shouted. Because they are engaging with culture, Laszlo countered. A bird flew into it, Gerald screamed, losing his composure. A blue jay suffered a concussion because of your culture. The bird is fine, I stood up. I saw it eating a worm an hour later. If anything, the fence is teaching the local wildlife to be more skeptical. I'm improving the evolutionary fitness of our birds. A ripple of laughter went through the room. Gerald looked around, panic setting in. He was losing them. He had expected a mob with pitchforks, but instead he had an audience that was entertained. Look, said a man in the back. I recognized him as Steve, who had been fined last year for leaving his Christmas lights up until February. I hate the HOA rules. If Dave found a loophole. I say good for him. It's better than looking at Gerald's spreadsheets. Here, here, someone shouted. I kind of like the raccoon, Mrs. Higgins admitted. He has kind eyes, like my late husband, but with more fur. Gerald slammed the gavel down again, harder this time. The head of the gavel flew off and skittered across the floor. Enough! Gerald yelled, his voice cracking. We are voting! All in favor of Amendment 42B, banning fence art, raise your hands! Gerald's hand shot up. So did the hands of 3 other board members. The rest of the room sat still. All opposed? I asked. A sea of hands went up. Steve raised both hands. Even Mrs. Higgins raised a hesitant hand. Gerald stared at the vote. He turned pale. He gripped the podium. The democracy he claimed to love had turned against him. Fine, Gerald whispered. Fine. The amendment fails. The mural stays. He looked defeated. He looked smaller. For a second, I actually felt bad for him. He was a petty tyrant, sure, but he was a man who genuinely believed that beige paint was the glue holding civilization together. Then, he looked up at me, and his eyes narrowed. But mark my words, Dave, he hissed into the microphone. I will find a violation. If 1 inch of that paint peels, if 1 blade of painted grass fades, I will fine you into bankruptcy. The victory party in the parking lot was short-lived. As we walked out, Officer Miller pulled up in his cruiser. He rolled down the window. Dave, he said, we need to talk. I won, Miller, I said, high-fiving Laszlo. The people have spoken. Yeah, about that, Miller said. I just got a call from the city, not the HOA, the city. My stomach dropped. What? Apparently there's a municipal ordinance regarding distracted driving hazards. We've had 3 fender benders in front of your house in the last 4 hours. People are slowing down to take pictures of the raccoon, and the guy behind them isn't stopping. That's not my fault. Doesn't matter, Miller said. The city engineer declared it a public safety risk. They're ordering you to cover it up within 48 hours, or they condemn the fence and tear it down. I looked at Gerald, who was walking to his car. He had heard. He stopped. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. City ordinance, Gerald said, savoring the words. Supersedes HOA bylaws. What a shame. I looked at Laszlo. Laszlo looked at the ground. The establishment always wins, Laszlo sighed. I was trapped. If I kept the mural, the city would bulldoze it. If I painted over it, I had to follow the HOA rules. Gerald had won by default. I walked over to Gerald. He was unlocking his pristine white sedan. "Gerald," I said. "Yes, David?" He sounded positively chirpy. "Let's make a deal." Gerald leaned against his car. "I'm listening." "The city says the mural has to go." "Fine, but I am not paying to have it sandblasted and repainted dune beige. Can't afford it, and I hate the color." "Those are the rules," Gerald shrugged. "Here's the offer," I said. "I will voluntarily paint over the mural tomorrow. Myself. No cost to the HOA for legal fees, no fighting the city. I will make the fence a solid, uniform color." "Dune beige?" Gerald asked. "No," I said firmly. "Tuscan sunset." Gerald bristled. "That is a non-compliant pigment." "It's a color, Gerald. It's brown with a little red. If you grant me a one-time variance for the color Tuscan sunset, I will destroy the raccoon. I will destroy the rot. I will give you a clean, solid, boring fence. No more tourists, no more crashes, no more mocking." Gerald thought about it. He looked at the chaos of the parking lot. He looked at the neighbors who were still laughing about the gavel. He looked at me, and he saw that I was ready to drag this out for years if I had to. "Tuscan sunset," Gerald muttered. "It is aggressive." "It's warm," I said. "And it's over." Gerald sighed. "Fine. You get your variance, but I want that raccoon gone by noon tomorrow. And if I see one brushstroke of texture, I will sue you personally." "Deal," I said. We didn't shake hands. The next morning, Laszlo and I stood before the masterpiece one last time. "It is a tragedy," Laszlo said, looking at Barnaby. "We are destroying history." "We are avoiding a lawsuit," I said. I had a bucket of Tuscan sunset, solid stain, open at my feet. "Can I at least keep the section with the raccoon?" Laszlo asked. "No, Gerald is watching." I pointed to the window of Gerald's house down the street. The blinds were open. He was there, binoculars pressed to his face. "Let's do this," I said. We spent the next 4 hours rolling thick, reddish-brown stain over the hyper-realistic rot. It was painful. We watched the splinters vanish under the sludge. We watched the weeds disappear. Finally, we painted over Barnaby. I apologized to him as I rolled the roller over his eyes. By 1:00 p.m., the fence was a solid, uniform Tuscan sunset. It looked nice. It looked normal. Gerald walked down the street at 1:05 p.m. He inspected it. He ran his hand along the wood. It was just stain. No tricks. "Well," Gerald said, adjusting his belt. "It's not beige, but it is acceptable. It is orderly." "Are we good, Gerald?" I asked. "We are compliant," Gerald said. "That is all I ask." He turned and walked away, a bounce in his step. He had won. He had tamed the anarchy. I waited until he was inside his house. Then I turned to Laszlo. "Did you do it?" I asked. Laszlo smiled. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his finest, smallest brush, a single hair brush used for miniature restoration. "Panel 4, Laszlo whispered. "Eye level." We walked over to the 4th panel. To the naked eye, from 2 feet away, it looked like a solid red-brown board. But I leaned in. I leaned in until my nose was almost touching the wood. There, painted with microscopic precision, sitting on the grain of the wood, was a fly. It was a housefly. The iridescence on its wings was perfect. The tiny hairs on its legs were visible only if you squinted. It cast a tiny, painted shadow on the wood. It was the most realistic thing Laszlo had ever painted. He will see it, Laszlo said. Eventually. He'll be walking Winston, I said, picturing it. He'll stop. He'll see a fly on the fence. He'll try to shoo it away. And it won't move, Laszlo grinned. He'll swipe at it. He'll think it's stuck in the drying paint. He'll try to flick it off with his fingernail. And he will feel nothing but smooth varnish, Laszlo finished. And he won't be able to prove it's paint, I said. He'll think he's crazy, or he'll have to admit that he's obsessing over a speck the size of a grain of rice. It was a time bomb, a psychological landmine waiting for a sunny afternoon. Laszlo, I said, putting my arm around his skinny shoulders. You're a genius. I know, he said. We walked back toward the house. The fence was red. The neighborhood was quiet. The war was over. But every time I looked out my window and saw Gerald walking by, pausing, squinting, and swiping at the air near the fourth panel, I knew that the spirit of the raccoon lived on. And that was the sweetest victory of all.